Well, now that we're out of the wind, let's talk a little bit about the Krej. You know, this is a really unique bait in that when it first came out, you know, it's always been marketed as a forward-facing sonar bait. And the reality is that all baits that are forward-facing sonar baits can be used for normal fishing conditions. Now, what makes a forward-facing sonar bait a good forward-facing sonar bait is generally the fact that you can interact with the fish. So if you're fishing a Krej, what that means is if you see a fish on your graph coming after it, you can drop your bait back and actually like entice that fish into biting. But the reality is all baits can be used as forward-facing sonar baits. And they can be used as non-forward-facing sonar baits, as I showed you today. And that's one of the things that I love about this bait is the fact that it's kind of like a jerkbait, but it's not kind of like a jerkbait. And what I mean by that is a jerkbait, as I mentioned earlier, slashes side to side. It's more of a horizontal bait in the water column. The Krej is a horizontal bait, but it's more actually as a vertical bait, meaning it goes up and down. So it's almost like a jerkbait that goes up and down in the water column versus a jerkbait that slides side to side and is more horizontal. Now, the reason I like that is the fact that I can get my bait down to where the fish are at. The water here is really cold. We're post turnover. The fish just don't want to come that far off the bottom. And as you saw, the bites I've gotten today are really coming on that pause for the most part. And when that bait is backsliding down, and when it's backsliding, it's also shimmying side to side. It's a really good way to trigger those fish into biting. Now, from a retrieve standpoint, if I had forward-facing sonar, I could see exactly what my bait was doing. Now, I can't do that, but I can still envision what my bait's doing. And that's the key here, is it really is a mental bait, because I have to know where my bait's at. If I let it go to the bottom, generally I was catching some grass. If I don't let it go deep enough, the fish aren't going to come up off the bottom for it. So you really got to pay attention to what you're doing. And if you watch the fish catches that I have, you'll see that I'm doing a bunch of different things. Now, the biggest no-no, in my opinion, with this bait is to overwork it. What I mean by that is if you took this out and you start really hitting it like a jerk bait, the bait slashes so much, it's going to foul up. And if it fouls up, you've ruined the cast. The other thing is if you work it too fast, instead of the bait kind of giving a nice side-to-side rolling motion, it can tend to spin. So it's a bait for me that I like to work slower. If you watch me, the fish that I'm triggering are generally coming on slow sweeps, or they're coming when I let the bait pause and actually fall back to them. And when I am twitching the bait, I'm twitching it really soft. I'm not really hitting it hard like a jerk bait. I'm just kind of taking my rod tip and I'm like twitch, 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 twitch. And what that's doing is that's taking the bait and it's basically walking the dog. If I hit too hard, that bait turns around too far. It ends up getting fouled up eventually, and it's just not the way to work it. This bait is really meant to be worked with your small twitches. Let the bait's action on the fall do itself. And the other thing I like is when I do a long sweep. So generally what I do on a cast, I throw it out, I let the bait go down to roughly where I think the bottom is. Now again, a lot of times I don't want it to actually hit the bottom. If it's a clean bottom, I will let it sit on the bottom and actually dead stick it. But in an area like I was fishing today, there was some grass, eel grass, things like that, that I wanted to get close to the bottom. So I was in 6 to 12 foot. The grass was generally 2 to 3 feet off the bottom. So I would let the bait go down to roughly where I think the bottom is. And then generally what I'll do is I'll give it a couple little twitches, like I'm softly working a jerk bait. And then at that point, I'll actually sweep the rod, but it's not a fast sweep. It's not like I'm working a fluke for blueback herring and I'm really trying to sweep it. All I'm trying to do is pull the bait. When I pull the bait has a nice wobble side to side on it. But really more than anything, what I'm trying to do is pull the bait away from the area I just worked. So I'll sweep it a couple of times. That bait is now probably 15 or 20 feet away. Then I kill it and I let the backslide shimmy happen. And that's when I feel like I'm working a new area. Then I twitch it a few times. I might sweep it another time, twitch it a couple times, sweep it. but I'm really just kind of working it more vertical, because when you pull this bait with the inverted lip, it's not like a normal jerk bait which wants to dive. It actually comes towards the surface, and that's one of the reasons guys love it for forward-facing sonar. When you can entice a fish to the surface, generally that's a really good way to get them to strike. The only way you can do that, though, is if you know there's a fish behind the bait. And if you get that fish to come up to the surface, they'll usually bite it because they're pinning it against the surface. That's one of the things that makes it such a good forward-facing sonar bait. But with respect to the way I was fishing, I didn't know if there was a fish behind it or not. So I go to what the way I look at it, it's almost like I'm yo-yoing the bait, right? I let it fall to the bottom. I'll twitch it a few times, have a couple of big sweeps, and when I sweep it, it's coming closer to the surface. It's coming to the top half of the water column. Then I let it fall back down and shimmy back down. And generally, almost every bite today came when I was letting it shimmy back down to the bottom, because it has such an enticing motion. You know, another great feature of this bait is it casts extremely well. It is heavier than a standard jerk bait. So like on a day like today, you know, I'm just on a small bay. The wind was howling pretty good. I didn't have big white caps because I was on a small section of the lake, but casting wise, it just bombs into the wind. It still doesn't flutter when the wind blows. It just is a straight shot. You can throw it a mile. Now I was working it on pretty standard, heavier tackle, I guess, overall. I mean, this is a 7.3 medium heavy fast action rod. I've got it on 12-pound Berkley 100% fluorocarbon, and then this is a Xenon MGX. Now, it's a faster reel. It was an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel, but I was working it so slow that, you know, I really wasn't doing anything with my reel handle other than just picking up line. You know, I was letting my rod do most of the working for me. But it's just a really good bait to be out there throwing around. Gives the fish a different look on those flats specifically. That's where I really like to throw it when I can't use it with forward-facing sonar. Obviously, if you can fish it with forward-facing sonar, you can fish it all the way down to 30-40 feet if you want to. But it's a bait that has definitely, the second half of this year, guys have finally figured out how to work it. You know, when it came out, I had these before they hit the public, you know, and I got to fish with them. My feedback to Berkley was, it's an awesome bait, very unique. It has a lot of cool motion to it. The bait backslides with a wiggle, like, it's awesome. The thing is, it takes some mental capacity to fish this, meaning you have to be aware of what your bait's doing, regardless of whether you're using forward-facing sonar or not. You have to pay attention. You have to understand what the bait does when you work the bait with your rod. What does the bait do when I sweep it? What does it do with small twitches? What happens when I have big twitches? You know, you got to understand as much what hurts the action of the bait or what will foul the bait as you do what actually helped trigger the bass. So it's not a spinner bait. You just don't take it out there and fish it, cast it and retrieve it with a few little twitches in it. You really have to pay attention to what you're doing with it, which makes it a much more complicated bait than a lot of other baits on the market. And that was my feedback. But what I also said was, once guys understand how to fish it, we're gonna see guys catching them with it. And that's exactly what's happened. You're starting to see a lot of higher level tournaments where guys are catching them. You're starting to, it's really one of those baits that's like it's on the down low with the top level guys out there right now. So generally what that means is you give it 6 to 12 months and all of a sudden, you know, the general public are using them at all levels of competition. But you're going to hear a lot more about this bait coming out here. I mean, throughout the winter months, it's going to be a really good winter bait. I love it. You know, generally speaking, any of your shad colors, this is the Nebu color, one of my favorites. I love having a little bit of chartreuse on the backside there. But there's so many good shad colored patterns that, you know, there's plenty to choose from. There's some wild colored patterns, bright colored patterns too, that'll work great. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you found this helpful. I've had a lot of guys ask me for some follow-up videos on both the Berkley Krej as well as the Berkley Finisher, which is one of my favorite baits as well. I love that finisher. So we'll probably try to get out and do another video with the finisher. Assuming we can weather-wise. It's been nice, but we've definitely had some cooler weather pull in the last couple weeks, and I should say much cooler nights. And that's, you know, I've had backwaters around my house have had skim ice on it. So when that starts happening, if we get one cold blast in, it could really lock us up. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate all your support, and stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow for you.